Hello, this is Gerald Townsend with Townsend Asset Management. And today we're going to be looking at megatrends and how to include a megatrend in a portfolio. Whenever you do this, it's a little risky because uh, you're really not trying to predict the future. That's a dangerous thing to do, as this quote will show. And as Yogi Berra also looked at it, forecasts are, particularly about the future, are very dangerous things. So we're not really trying to predict, although we are gazing into the future, but megatrends are a little bit different than actual forecasting of the future. First of all, a megatrend is a thematic investment, a theme. Another way to look at that is investing with a story behind it. And there are cyclical themes, which are short and medium term, which we will not be covering today. And megatrend is really a long-term theme, and that's where we're going to put our attention today. But first, let's just recognize what cyclical themes are, so we can differentiate between the two. So cyclical things like the most recent political election, transitions at the White House or Congress, all these are cyclical because they're constantly going on over and over again. They have implications, certainly, but they're not megatrends. Interest rate changes, like today, we're a low interest rate climate. Will that be going up in the next few years? What about inflation? What about changes to tax laws and economic cycles and recovering from all this COVID that we've been experiencing? As important as these things are, these are cyclical. These are things that are shorter term in nature. So what's a megatrend? Well, a megatrend is massive. It's something global and sustainable, and it really defines the future because it impacts business, economy, societies, cultures, personal lives for long periods of time. They include disruptive technologies, changing demographics, shifts in behavior. All of these are examples of megatrends. So what we're going to look at today are 5 particular megatrends that are shaping our world. And many of these have been going on for a while. So megatrends, since they are long-term, don't be surprised if you look at this and say, well, of course, I knew that, or I read about this. That's okay. They're still megatrends. They go on for a good while. So global economic power shifts, demographics and social change, urbanization, climate change and the scarcity of resources, and then what's termed disruptive technologies. So first, let's just look at the global economic power shift. So, the Western world has been the economic power for since World War II, but there is a shift that's been going on for a while. And you could look at this with the emergence of China as a booming export-led economy. You can look at it even back to Japan, how it emerged after World War II. You can look at India or the emerging markets, for example. And of course, these things ebb and flow. But still, you'd say these are export-led growth countries that while they're still continuing to be focused on exports and manufacturing, as their own people become more middle class, there will be a shift to more consumption in these markets. Of course, on a global scale, that raises defense and security challenges for the US and others, as we see some of the current saber rattling that goes on between the US and China, and battles between globalism, what we've been experiencing with exports for many years, versus protectionism, where you want to protect certain domestic markets. And that is an ongoing battle that will always be there, but still globalism and a global economy, I believe, is here to stay. Now, let's look on to the second megatrend, and that's demographics and social change. So the more developed economies, Japan, US, Europe, have aging populations in general, whereas the more emerging economies have younger populations. So what's the impact of that? Well, a aging population, there's impact on Social Security and pensions in terms of pressure. There's impact on the need for social services, for healthcare, and which actually drives automation because it's a cost factor. There's a shift in consumer spending, as I mentioned, with emerging economies and greater middle class. There will be increasing their consumption. They will be spending money on more expensive things over time. So there's a shift there. It means new areas like cannabis or ESG investments, environmental, social, and governance, take a more important role in investing because of this, not just demographic, but a social change. Now, in addition, we've had for quite some time urbanization accelerating, a growth of what is termed mega cities, cities with more than 10 million in population, which within the next 10 years, they expect to see about 43 mega cities in the world. And this brings on vast infrastructure needs, communication, 5G, fiber, transit, social, from hospitals and schools, et cetera, housing. So a big pressure in urbanization, and which again drives a lot of development of technology. Now one interesting thing we might just observe is that with COVID, we've actually seen a little bit of hitting the brakes on urbanization. Many people are saying, gosh, I'm working now through Zoom, and I'm working remotely. I don't need to be in a high-rise office building somewhere. I could be anywhere in the world doing what I do. So that's an example actually of megatrends that, while they may not stop, could be altered in some way or slowed down. So megatrends have forces that work for them, but forces that can work against them. Still, urbanization and these needs are not changing in a big sense. So we do see that as a continuing thing, but with an asterisk perhaps, given what's going on with the coronavirus. The fourth area is climate change and resource scarcity. So we've seen this for some time now. We obviously climate change has been in the news for quite some time, which drives more efficient energy uses, which drives renewable energy, solar, wind, for example. Recycling is part of this. Electrical vehicles like Tesla is part of this climate change and resource scarcity. We see it in the productivity of agriculture. In some of these more emerging economies, as I mentioned, as they get more middle class, yet they also get less land for agricultural use, it means you have to have more productive use of agriculture. So you see things from, say, machinery producers like John Deere to chemical and fertilizer companies, new technologies such as drones, predictive weather analytics, precision agriculture. All these are examples of how the private sector is trying to deal with resource scarcity as well as with climate change. And of course, in climate change, you do have the fact that it's been heavily supported by government subsidies, tax credits, particularly solar tax credits for years. However, it is becoming much less expensive now to utilize renewable energy versus traditional energy. The final area of these megatrends is one of disruptive technology. And these are things that would range from, say, cloud computing, where every big business is going, data analytics, because we're turning out such massive amounts of data and it's affecting so many industries, because if you can crunch the data, you can really then get into things like robotics, artificial intelligence, using the data. Drone delivery, e-vehicles, again, like Tesla or others, even self-driving vehicles. Blockchain is related to Bitcoin and other virtual currencies. Blockchain is actually the, if you will, the technology behind how these virtual currencies exist. And regardless what happens with the virtual currencies, the blockchain, think about that as the plumbing system behind the virtual currencies. The blockchain is already being used in a variety of industries. 3D printing, 5G networks, healthcare, such as with, again, telemedicine or other areas. All these technologies are disrupting existing companies. They are changing, in some cases, our lifestyles. They're creating some investment opportunities, and that's what we're going to touch on here next. So given all these megatrends, we can observe them. How do we do anything with them? Well, the one good thing is you may already be doing something in this area without even thinking about it. And this is just an example. This is not a list of recommendations or to go buy these companies necessarily, So these are companies that are already involved in some degree or another with these megatrends. We think of Visa. There is a trend towards more digital payments. Look at what's happened with the coronavirus, where many places do not want to take cash. They want it to be digital. Overseas, they're far further ahead on a cashless society than we are here. So companies like Visa that are part of the financial plumbing system for payments would stand to be a beneficiary of trends like that. We mentioned the cloud or e-commerce, that's Amazon. That's changing, consumers changing how they buy, and companies having things hosted more in the cloud. Of course, Microsoft is also an example of that. I've already mentioned John Deere. We think of that about them as farm machinery, but they're heavily into robotics and what is termed precision agriculture. Next Era Energy, the largest clean energy utility company out there, at least in the U.S. Ecolab, more in the hygiene technologies, and of course, particularly with coronavirus, that's been a big area of concern, hygiene. We've already mentioned Tesla, Square, and financial technology. J.P. Morgan is heavily involved in that same area. We think of Walt Disney. Streaming content is certainly a mega trend of how entertainment is now delivered to us. Wabtec, a company that actually makes technology for transit systems like trains or subways, but that plays into the trend of increasing urbanization and trying to be more efficient and high tech in the infrastructure of that. Zoetis, there has been a trend towards more animal health, whether it's pet products or other, but Zoetis is a spin out from Pfizer some years ago that is focused just in the area of animal health. Constellation Brands, known for the spirits, but they have a lot of cannabis exposure as well. So again, there are other examples, but these are just companies, large companies that may already be in a portfolio that are participating in megatrends. Now, outside of companies, though, there are what are termed thematic funds. That now thematic funds is a broader concept than megatrends, because a thematic, you can have a theme on anything. So just because it's a thematic fund does not mean it's a fund that is pursuing a megatrend. So here we're talking about ones that are. So there are usually these are exchange traded funds, ETFs, that are focused in, say, renewable energy like solar or wind, in the area of water, because that's a resource scarcity worldwide, infrastructure, robotics, and artificial intelligence. Could be, again, agriculture, blockchain, etc. Healthcare technologies, ones that are getting either into telemedicine or some sort of diagnostics, genomics, battery storage. If you're doing all of this stuff in the cloud and with remote areas, it takes a lot of battery storage, and e-vehicles require some pretty massive battery and storage for a long periods of time. Mobility, which is the electric and autonomous vehicles. You can find an exchange traded fund. There's a couple of hundred of them out there actually that focus on one or more of these areas of megatrends. So how do you even start approaching this area then, if you're interested in bringing it more into your portfolio or just even understanding it? So what we're looking at here is just some questions to ask yourself or to look at your current portfolio and think about. So first is, am I talking about a cyclical trend or a structural trend, which is a megatrend, something that's longer term in nature? So if you're looking at a company or a specific, what you might perceive as a megatrend, you have to think about it. Am I identifying this correctly? What is the size of this opportunity? Is it pretty small? Is it worldwide? Is it huge? What do I think the size is? Is it even investable? You may identify what you feel like is a megatrend. You just may not really be able to invest in it. A good example might be, so let's say space travel. That sounds like a wonderful megatrend for the future. It's also one that is practically impossible for an investor to go out there today and find anything that is directly tied to future space travel. Maybe one day, but I don't see that yet. Are my investments liquid, which they would be, say, an exchange-traded fund or an individual company? Illiquid is more of what hedge fund world or partnerships get into. So for individual investors, it would have to be liquid. Am I looking for direct or diluted exposure? What I mean by that is you may have an example of a company that is, let's say, working in the area of robotics, but that's not all they do. Maybe that's only 10% of what they do. And so investing in that company, you're only getting a small exposure to robotics. That's a diluted exposure. On the other hand, there may be a smaller company that is 100% or 90% of what they do is in a very specific area, robotics. So what am I looking for? Diluted exposure may be a little safer, whereas the direct exposure may be more volatile but have a bigger payoff. Which gets around the thing about risk. What is the risk if this theme does not materialize? I'm wrong, either in terms of size or timing of the theme. Just understand that. What's the supply and value chain? Who are the companies supplying the other companies that are the main ones in this theme, either from an opportunity standpoint or just to understand the value chain of a particular company? And what is my conviction level? I feel very confident this is worth putting some money in. And then keep in mind that you must be right 3 times when you are pursuing what you feel like is a profitable megatrend. You must be right, first of all, on selecting a good trend, that you've identified a good trend. Secondly, the vehicle, whether it's several individual companies, whether it's an ETF, what vehicle am I using to pursue this theme? Thirdly, you must be right on timing. You could get in too soon or too late, or not hold it long enough for it to materialize. So you have to be, again, you have to have a certain conviction level and be right a few different times. Finally, just in kind of wrapping up megatrends, questions to kind of address. Do you want more direct exposure? Again, with your existing portfolio, I would probably argue you, without even knowing that you have reasonable exposure to a variety of megatrends, because it's in various companies that are already doing some of that. But if you want more direct exposure, you decide, yes, I'd like to, just to give an example, I'd like to have more solar power in my portfolio, or more in the area of robotics in my portfolio in that area. Again, you understand what you already have, you understand the megatrend, robotics, solar power, whatever that trend that is of interest to you, understand the company or the fund, how is it put together. Remember, a fund will have multiple companies in it. In some cases, only a handful of companies may dominate the fund. So you're really focused, even though you're in a fund, half the fund may be devoted to 4 or 5 companies. And then finally, our suggested approach in pursuing any megatrend is what we term core and explore. So your core of your portfolio is your diversified funds or a diversified group of individual companies. The explorer is that I want to take a smaller amount of my portfolio. It's 5%, it's 10%, it's 20%. And I'm going to explore 2, 3, 4 different megatrends. But it's a smaller amount of my portfolio. I'm not going to risk the majority of my portfolio on just a few megatrends. So that kind of wraps up the seminar. Hope you got some thoughts out of this. If you have any questions or like to discuss this or how some of this might play in your own portfolio, please give us a call.